Hello, everyone, and welcome back once again. We are blessed to have Dr. Hardt with us. Dr. Hardt, thank you for taking time out of your day.
Great pleasure, Doug. Happy to be with you again.
Well, we've had so many great questions come in, Dr. Hardt, and I thought this one was particularly interesting. What they're asking is, how can you use your brain waves to actually manifest?
Well, people do it all the time. That's why we're such a successful species. Well, there are different brainwaves, and both the Hermetic and the Celtic traditions teach that to do a work of magic, which in other languages performing a miracle, manifesting, using the law of attraction, requires three elements. Celtic and Hermetic traditions agree. These three elements are desire, expectation, and merging. Desire needs to be strong. Everybody knows desire. The expectation needs to be confident. Now, some people trip up there because they have a lot of doubt. And in manifestation, magic, and in life, if you doubt you can do something, guess what? You're probably right. Okay, so the expectation needs to be confident and the desire needs to be strong. Now, once you've got that ginned up, then you need to do something that might seem counterintuitive, which is to let it all go. Let go and let God. And both of these traditions, Celtic and Hermetic, refer to this step as merging. Now, when I was studying with an archdruid, I pressed him repeatedly for, what's merging? He said, well, you know how to merge. And I go, yeah, I mean, I learned that from your best student, who was my first Celtic teacher. And he actually reached out to me because he saw me on an ESPN special. Every year, ESPN would do a 90-minute special called The Best of Sportsline, where they would show, 4 to 6 minutes of some athlete, a bunch of different athletes, each who had gone into the zone, maybe during the World Series or the NBA playoffs or whatever. And like everything, the basketball player was throwing up was going in the basket. And so then they would interview them and they would talk about the zone. And then I was a teaser at the end of the show where they came to my lab and I had the opportunity to talk about merging from the point of view of brainwaves, which is going into the zone. And so that was really fun. And this Celtic teacher saw me. He saw by my eyes that I knew how to merge. And he sent one of his minions to come and get me and bring me to him. And then I became a student. Well, later I studied with his teacher, who's the archdruid. And I pressed him repeatedly for what's merging. The only definition I ever got out of him, he said, merging is when your awareness becomes one with the ground of being. And if you've done it, you go, oh my God, oh yeah, that is so, yeah, it's so right on. And if you haven't done it, you go, ground of being, what's that? Can you tell me more? And so that's a very deep topic. What is the ground of being? I believe Martin Buber, a German philosopher, referred to it as the Dasein. But more to the point of brainwaves and manifesting or doing works of magic or doing miracles. The archdruid said, and this kind of blew me away, he said, merging is compatible with all states. Because I could understand alpha, theta, and delta, but I would be hard pressed to find any virtuous merging going on in beta, because in my research, when I, at the request of federal grantors who wanted a control condition, I had people enhance beta. When their beta went up, when they successfully enhanced beta, they became irritable, became angry, they became unhappy. And so I have not done much beta training since then. I've done some suppression on beta. For example, in one of my research studies, I discovered when I was working with the brain energy maps that all the negative emotions had a common structural feature in the topology of the mind, in the brain energy maps. I erect on a surface which has head, site, and frequency as the X and Y, and then the vertical dimension, up or down, is the relationship between changes in brain activity of that frequency at that location on the brain, the relationship between changes in that brain activity with changes in whatever the emotion is. We have 21 different moods in our mood scales and a brain energy map for each one of those, as well as for each one of the scales on the MMPI. And for example, I learned that all the negative mind states, anxiety, depression, unhappiness, hostility, anger, depression, dejection, all had a huge spike, in other words, a mountain, in the left temporal slow beta range. And so we know that simple spiritual rules like the rule of St. Benedict caution people to avoid negative thinking, sadness, anger, fear. And so it turns out that there is a structural similarity in four-dimensional space in the brain energy maps where all the negative mind states have a prominent feature in left temporal slow beta. And, oh, by the way, the mind state of clear thinking has a well there. So reduction in that activity associated with clear thinking, which is a gateway state for all higher consciousness. You cannot go into any higher state of consciousness if you have the brainwaves and the mind state of anger, hostility, depression, dejection, sadness, unhappiness, anxiety. You just can't go there. You're blocked. It's like a monkey trying to pull his hand out of the coconut because he won't let go of the fruit that was in there as the bait. All he has to do is let go and he can get free. As long as you have the anger, the fear, the sadness, you cannot enter into higher states of consciousness. And so merging compatible with all states is, to me, somewhat puzzling because I don't know how beta would work with that. But alpha, let me tell you some alpha stories about manifesting. Typically in the alpha trainings, starting on second or third day, we ask people to write down their intentions. It can be as simple as, oh, I want a new house in Calgary, Alberta, Canada by this September. Or it can be, I want world peace, or I want to excel in forgiveness, or I want health, wealth, and happiness for me and all my family, or whatever it is, combinations of things. And so then the way it works is when the alpha enhancement segment of the day begins, after the first startup epic, then the technician will read the intention over the intercom for the person in chamber one, and that person goes into receive mode, and all the other people intend, and then everyone gets a turn. And so these can be extremely powerful. It's done in alpha, and you see, it's not just alpha, but it's alpha with the power of the group. Remember, together we're better and stronger. Jesus said, where two or three are gathered together in my name, there am I also. And my own understanding is that when people are on the same brainwave length, not different, but on the same brainwave length, the power of their intention scales as a power function of the number of people who are coherent. So if Doug, you and I each had a manifesting power of 10, and we literally got our heads together on the same intention, we would have 10 plus 10, but raised to the power of 2. So instead of 20, it would be 400, because 20 squared is 400. And if we bring in a third, we'd have 10 plus 10 plus 10, which is 30, but raised to the third power is all of a sudden 27,000. If we have 4 people, we have 2.5 million. If we have 5 people, we have over 310 million. And if we have 6 people, we have over 47 billion if each person has a manifesting power of 10. So the power of the group is enormous. Now, groups differ in the degree to which they can be coherent, because for true coherence, you have to have the same frequency and you have to have stable phase, ideally the same phase, but at least stable phase. If one person is making alpha at 8 and another was making alpha at 12, there's not going to be many moments of coherence between them. But perhaps one of the highlights of alpha manifesting occurred in a training center with 5 men. And one of them is a dear friend, David Stephen. And it was day 3. He had done multiple trainings. He knew intentions were coming. And he asked me if he could dedicate his intention to someone else. I said, yeah, sure. What's the story? And he had talked to Donna Hurst, a woman who was managing a 700-door apartment building that he'd bought the year before in Colorado Springs. And her husband had been admitted to the hospital that morning with total lung collapse and wasn't expected to live out the day. And so David asked if he could dedicate his 2-minute epic with all 5 of them focusing on that to try to heal Brian Hurst, who was in critical care. The backstory was that terrible blizzard in Colorado that day, and Brian's office, USGS, US Geological Service, had called him and wanted him to go into the high mountains and find a section marker, one of those metal discs that are buried at the intersections of the sections, square miles, giving the altitude and the latitude and the longitude and things like that. Well, Brian knew the area was prone to avalanches and he was freaking out and didn't want to go. And so he grabbed a big can of silicone spray and his hiking boots, and sitting in their little kitchen, he started spraying and spraying and spraying, and he kind of tranced out, probably in fear or whatever, and he breathed in a whole can of silicone, had total lung collapse, and now he's in ICU. And so, but Donna Hurst is at bedside, and David arranged with her to note the time if there was any change in Brian's condition. And so at the training center, which was at 324B Martin Avenue in Santa Clara, California, Miguel was my lead technician, and David asked him to keep track of the time when David's intention began and when it ended. And after enhancement, David asked if he could break protocol and call Donna, and to his utter amazement and delight, within 1 minute of the group of the 5 of them finishing the intention to heal Brian, there was a 40% step function increase in Brian's lung function, and he's now off the critical list. He's not expected to die that day. So hooray for the group mind intention in alpha. As it turned out, these 5 men had alpha frequencies that were fairly close together. So at any given moment, there might have been 2 or 3 or even 5, all on the same wavelength, which of course, you know how that increases the power of the intention. And so that was day 3. Well, it was a 7-day training. So each day they repeated the intention for Brian. And each day, within a minute, there was a step function increase in his lung function. And at the end of day 7, he pulled off all the tubes and monitors, got up, got dressed, and left the hospital to the somewhat dismay of the doctors, who had never seen anything like that before. We could call it alternative medicine in order to, sort of align with others in the same spirit. Okay, so there we have merging associated with alpha. Now, in theta, I'll tell a personal story. And I became very interested when I was in California about 1986. I became roommates with Tom Wrench, who I had met at 24 Hour Fitness. And he was a total gearhead. He loved mechanical things. He had a big lifted Dodge 4x with a camper. and we did some outrageous camping trips in that. But he he loved mechanical things so much that it activated a latent desire in me for classic cars. And I should say, after 6 years with Tom as my roommate, I went from 0 classic cars to over 50 classic cars. They were mostly GM of the 60s. I had a goal of having a Bonneville hardtop and matching convertible every year from 59 to 70, and I got pretty close at one point. And so this manifesting story is a theta story. So I had learned along the way that there was only 1 year where the Pontiac Grand Prix had a convertible, and it was 1967. Had hidden headlights. It was the pace car at the Indy 500. So it was a pretty snazzy car. And I wanted one. I had a 67 Pontiac, a 2-door hardtop with a big engine, but I wanted a Grand Prix convertible. So I'm doing a theta training. I'm leading a theta training, but I would also get electrodes on, and I would go into, if there was an empty chamber, and I would lie in the theta chair. And so I'm lying there in the theta chair, and this midnight blue 1967 Pontiac convertible, hidden headlights were closed, came up. I'm in my chamber. It came up, and the bumper stopped about, that far in front of my eyes. And, I go, wow, what's this car doing in my chamber? And I looked at it, and, it was beautiful midnight blue. Then the session ended. And when the technician came in, they handed me a phone number of a man who had called. I don't know how he got my number at work, but he had a midnight blue 1967 Pontiac Grand Prix convertible for sale. And it had all the trick options, including power vent windows, which has always been one of my favorite bell and whistle. Now, the interesting thing about manifesting in theta, it has different characteristics in terms of permanence compared to manifesting in alpha. You manifest something in alpha and it's there. Brian Hurst is still alive, okay? But this car was my favorite. It was absolutely my joy, my dream car. And so I drove it every day for several months. And then something happened. I got busy and I was traveling, and the car sat for maybe a couple of months and I didn't drive it. And then something happened, and to this day, I cannot tell you what happened, but it was taken away from me. Now, I'm not saying it was stolen. I happen to know that there was a big, tall Norwegian guy living in Grass Valley, California, who became the owner of the car, but I don't know if I gave it to him or if he bought it, or if he bought it, how much he paid for it. But all I knew was I didn't have it anymore. And so it's kind of like when the children of Israel left Egypt and wandered in the desert, God fed them every day with manna. Now, they couldn't save the manna overnight, it would rot, except on the night before the Sabbath. They could save enough, they could gather enough for 2 days. And so when you manifest in theta, things can show up, boom, like that. No foreplay. I mean, it's just there. But if you don't need it anymore, it's also not there. And so it's kind of like nature's recycling. You need something, you want it, you manifested it in theta. And as long as you need it, it's there for you. But if you don't need it anymore, it goes back into the Akash. And so I'm actually getting goosebumps just in the understanding, the deeper understanding of that truth. And so merging is compatible with all states. So let's talk about merging in delta. And so the most powerful ways of merging are in delta. And here's a hypothetical. This was a story passed down to me by the Archdruid. Druids, you perhaps know, were part of the Celtic tradition, Celtic religion. And in 1066, when William the Conqueror stormed into the British Isles, He swept into Celtic villages, who considered them heathen, and he stripped the people naked. And the Druids used little tattoos to distinguish their rank: first degree, second degree, third degree. In my studies, I only attained the first degree. But if they had what were these tattoos, which the soldiers were told were witch marks, they would be thrown alive into the fire. And so the Ovids and the Bards didn't have tattoos, and so they could escape notice, blend in with the regular serfs of the population. And so the Druids were the ones that survived, tended to be pretty secretive. They gathered together in what were called covens. And then covens got a bad rap. So now they call them colleges. And a college is limited to 50 people, a high priest and a high priestess, and 48 members. And it's understood that there are some works of magic that can only be performed with a full college. And so the Archdruid was suggesting that when King Philip of Spain was amassing this huge Spanish armada and an army to go with it, so he could invade England, because he realized Queen Elizabeth was toying with him and she was never going to marry him and let him acquire control of England by marriage. So he's going to invade. And so eventually the Spanish Armada is ready, the armies are loaded, and they set out across the channel. And suddenly, out of nowhere, this hurricane shows up. Now, if you know anything about hurricanes, you know that they follow the Coriolis force, and in the northern hemisphere, that means they are swept to the west. Well, somehow this hurricane was able to evade the powerful Coriolis force, and it went east to England, and just in time to decimate the Spanish Armada. Some of the ships were so tossed about that I think one of them went around the northern end of Scotland and then limped back to Spain with a broken mast or two. But the Archdruid suggested that it may have been a combination of a number of colleges causing this atmospheric abnormality, a hurricane going to the east. And so now they didn't have brainwave training. They knew you needed numbers to have effects, but whirling up a hurricane as needed to destroy the Spanish Armada is quite a feat of magic if you care to go in that interpretive direction. And so in terms of Delta trainings, we've had people do Delta trainings. Typically when somebody, it turns out that Delta is associated with Kundalini. And when somebody shows up, like for an alpha training, and they have big delta waves, often preceded a burst with like a twitch before or after, I'll ask the person, are you aware of being able to influence other people? And they always say yes. Sometimes they freak out that, well, how do you know? Well, I see it in your brainwaves. And so when people manifest delta, most people don't walk around, even, well, very few people have the ability to make waking delta. I personally have spoken with over 150 Kundalini yoga teachers, none of whom has ever had a Kundalini awakening. And so there are methods which, if enough people do them, maybe one or two here or there, in the thousands, somebody will have a Kundalini, so the tradition continues. But it's not as automatic as making the brainwaves. When you make the brainwaves, remember brainwaves rule. We've had a number of people, even in alpha trainings, break out into full-on delta, shaking in the chamber, trembling with the awesome power of the Kundalini coming up the spine. And what people can do with this is, I mean, I don't know that there are any limits. It's a question of how deep the merge can go. I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. There was a woman in training. She had indigenous delta, and she told a story. I asked her to tell some stories about how she altered reality. She was on a plane on the aisle seat on the right side, and across the aisle was a little 7-year-old boy with his father, and they ran into some really bumpy air, and the plane is being thrown around. The little boy is freaking out. He's crying. He's hysterical. And the woman wasn't worried about herself, but she was very concerned about the little boy. So she went, now you stop that. And she did that in Delta. And the plane was immediately in totally calm air, and there wasn't a bump all the way to when the plane landed. Another time, this woman had gone to Mexico City to meet with some high-ranking military people. And there was an award ceremony that was happening on one of the days she was there, that was being held at a stadium of some kind. And so military men and their wives went. Now, there's kidnapping and things like that happens not infrequently in Mexico. And so the wives were warned, now you stay within this perimeter, we have guards. Well, one of the general's wives talked to our woman, our trainee, she's, we'll just go out here. So they went out, they snuck past the guards, and they're now out in the stadium, and they were recognized by some drug people, and they were kidnapped, and they were thrown in the back of a pickup, which is now speeding away from the Coliseum. And there's a guy in the back of a pickup with a gun on them, and 2 guys in the cab. And the general's wife is like freaking out. And so our woman trainee uses her powers, and the guy in the back of the pickup with the gun is thrown out of the pickup. The engine of the pickup freezes, the doors lock, and so the guys in the cab can't get out, and the soldiers run up and rescue them and arrest the bad guys and so on. So the ability of people in Delta to produce amazing changes at large scale is awesome. We could go on. There's other stories that I sometimes tell, but usually privately, because they have, should we say, national security implications, and we don't want to go there publicly. So emerging, manifesting, doing miracles, doing works of magic in alpha, in theta, and in delta. Y'all come, try it out. It's a lot of fun.
Hi, I'm Tony Robbins. Listen, if you are looking to improve your brain, your psyche, your ability, your emotions, your ability to really maximize your performance, and you want to really dig into your brain, my dear friend Dr. Jim Hardt and his BioCybernaut program is extraordinary. I've been through it myself. My wife Sage has, members of my family have, and we found it to be truly extraordinary. But it is not for the faint at heart. Unless you're dead serious about really taking things to the next level, don't bother. We went through the Alpha program designed to maximize your ability to create alpha waves. And it was challenging, and it was incredibly rewarding. And I'd recommend it to anybody serious about improving the quality of their lives, or including the quality of their family lives as well. So check out Cybernaut, check out Dr. Jim Hardt. And if you do, I think you'll be really, really pleased. And the entire time you are learning to think, and how you think these electrodes create sounds. And you learn how to put yourself in the zone of alpha. But it's a bitch. It's horrible. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody that wants easy experiences, but I'd recommend it to anybody that wants to grow immensely. And by the first day, I'm like, who do I got to shoot to get out of this thing? Oh, it's me. I'm the one that did this shit. Right? But by the end of the week, all 3 of us were able to go into this state of alpha. And if you're familiar with alpha, the best way I can describe alpha is there's no problem that can't be solved in alpha. Because every problem that we have was created by us.
Thank you for being here and absorbing this information about the science of brainwaves and about the stories of people whose lives have been beneficially altered, improved, by doing brainwave training at BioCybernaut. And now I'm reaching out to you to invite you to come and be a part of the BioCybernaut adventure. Biocybernauts are to inner space what astronauts are to outer space. So come and adventure with us. And if you'd like to leave a comment on the videos, you can do that, or there's a link you can click if you'd like to learn more. We welcome you to BioCybernaut.